Okay, welcome to day 3 of Trailgating here, Freetrail Saloon here in the heart of Chamonix, France. My name is Dylan Bowman, joined today by a new panel, and joining us for the first time here, making her much anticipated Trailgating debut, the great Leah Yingling. Leah, hello.
Hi, Dylan. I'm so excited to be here.
Thanks for coming. We just were talking about our mutual jet lag, although you've been here for 3 weeks. Fill the people in on what you've been up to.
I have no excuses for my jet lag. I woke up at 3 a.m. last night. It was up till 6 a.m. and I've been here for like 3 weeks. Been touring around Switzerland, which I haven't gotten to spend much time in, aside from a little bit of the UTMB course last year. So yeah, ending it here in Chamonix and crewing my husband Mike out there on Friday. So hoping for the best for him.
Awesome. I want to hear more about that in a little bit. Speaking of which, so she did the Swiss Alps 50K, right?
I
You
did.
and Mike both did it. You know, Ryan's a 100-mile finisher.
I was thinking about Ryan the whole time I was out there, about him and Kevin just sending it on the course last year.
The bro mosey of the century. 35 hours out in the Swiss Alps, but he earned a proud finish and had the best video of any final meters in a 100-mile race ever, walking slower than any human on planet Earth. But he got it done. And Leah, we're very happy to have you. Also joining us here this evening, Mr. Rod Farvard. Rod, good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you too.
Man, we're like sort of falling into a rhythm here together. We've recorded a lot of stuff together recently.
I know, you're going to have to start invoicing.
Yeah, right. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining. Quick bit of housekeeping before we jump into it. Of course, this evening's show is the UTMB preview, the big race happening on Friday evening into Saturday. Tomorrow, we're going to be back with the UTMB prediction show, plus we'll wrap up the OCC results as they come in. Dani, Moreno, and Francesco Puppi are supposed to come in after their race tomorrow to join me. So
After they both win.
Yes, exactly. Hopefully we're celebrating great performances from both of them. We're taking Friday off because we'll be out on the race courses all day for CCC and UTMB, but we'll be back in studio on Saturday with the instant recap show and the CCC results, and then on Sunday with the full weekend recap. Also, tonight, the Freetrail happy hour. I don't know if you guys are busy. Rod, you probably should get some sleep.
No, you should go to happy hour.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't sleep anyways, so
Yeah.
as well.
Have a little happy hour here in the studio after this evening's show. So if you're a member, jump in Slack. You can find information in there. And Rod will close things down early so you can get to bed.
We'll pour one out for you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Also, go get your fantasy picks in. Fantasy.freetrail.com, OCC, CCC, and UTMB. We're picking 10 deep in all 3. Make sure you check out Travis's new splits feature. Leah said she was just playing around with it.
It's incredible.
It's so cool.
Incredible.
So cool. Shout out to Travis. He also provided some good material for today's show. So that's a good teaser. But again, fantasy.freetrail.com. Get your picks in. You got a chance to win some good Freetrail swag plus head-to-toe kits from our partners at HOKA. And a big thank you to HOKA, by the way. Really, really appreciate them all. We're going to start with the course, but before we do that, quick note to our audience on the subject of fantasy. I have just received word that Jonathan Albin is officially out of tomorrow's race at OCC. He was like the second-ranked athlete, a past champion in OCC. Jonathan, we hope you're doing well, buddy. Hopefully, I'm sure this is the right decision for you, but to our viewers and listeners, if you're playing fantasy, you're going to want to adjust your ballots because I'm sure he is a popular pick. Okay, starting with the course, Tony with a Sony. Oh, and we got to say thank you to the guys behind the scenes, Ryan Thrower, Tony with a Sony. Tony's going to pull up a graphic of the UTMB course here. So we're going to dive in. Officially 109 miles, 33,000 feet of climbing. Let's start with, all 3 of us have done the race, so we've got some good experience out there. Starting with like a broad strokes overview, maybe Leah, you can get us started of just like what in your mind makes the UTMB unique, what makes it uniquely challenging?
I think for me, what stuck out last year was just how runnable that first 30K, 20 miles is. Extremely runnable. You start with a flat river path all the way from Chamonix to Les Houches, and the pace is fiery, it's hot, and you are getting stampeded if you're not going that hot pace. So I think for anybody that runs conservatively, it makes it pretty challenging because you're pretty much forced to go out at a pace that's a little bit more aggressive than you're comfortable with. However, I felt like the second half of the race was death by 1,000 cuts. Hill climb after hill climb after hill climb. The course switch up last year, which they are implementing again this year after Valorscene, is pretty challenging up to La Flagère before you do that final descent.
It's brutal.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
It's very rooty. And if you don't have quads, if you don't have feet, you're going to struggle in that section. So I think it was really dynamic for me racing it last year. You have to be good at just about everything.
That's what I was going to say. Rod, I'm sure you have a lot to add here. You're a 2-time finisher, right?
2-time finisher. Yeah. I mean, I would agree with all that. I think nowadays every race goes out really hard, and typically they do start out flat like this, but what's unique about the UTMB start is it's about 5 miles of it. So you could definitely get into your red line and not come back for a while in that 5 miles. And then you hit a very runnable climb that's very steep at the same time. So it's hard to say, how many people lose their race on that first bit, but I think it does happen. And it's interesting too, because really, you talk to most people who have finished this and are veterans of the race, they all say the crux of it is really the last 3 climbs. So you need legs on these really steep last 3 climbs that are extremely technical descents too. But at the same time, you have to get out hard. So it's like the front end of the course and the back end of the course that's like really pivotal, and you have to play your cards right in the middle somehow. So, yeah.
So tying that together, and this is something that I've been a broken record about, is like, I view UTMB as the ultimate speed trap, right? Because as Leah said, all the way through Lake Contamine, you're moving quickly. And of course, it's all the best athletes in the world, and everybody's at their peak fitness. So everybody's moving. That makes it very easy to miscalculate that effort, so that when you arrive in Champs-Élysées, which I think a lot of us view as the crux moment of the race, if you've miscalculated that effort early, it makes that final 50K extremely, extremely painful. So to our viewers and listeners, as Leah said, you really do have to be good at everything. It requires a very diverse skill set, and there are obviously a lot of athletes with that skill set on the start line this weekend. And it leads me to want to talk about potential racing dynamics, because I think there's been obviously a lot of rapid evolution in the sport, and that's been reflected in the way a lot of these races play out. We'll remember back in 2016, Ludovic Pommeret came from way back, almost an hour behind to win the race. We've also seen in 2019, Pau Capel go wire to wire. And then we've seen things, and Courtney did the same thing last year, and we've seen things that sort of split the difference. Jim sort of coming from behind last year, Katie off the front, fading and then rebounding. But just opening up the conversation about potential racing dynamics, how are you viewing it before we get to some of the characters in the field? Leah, we can start with you.
Yeah, what kind of stands out to me is the women's field specifically. 3 athletes that come to mind that race fast and hot right off the bat are Katie Scheid, Ruth Croft, and Marianne Hogan. I think they're going to be extremely honest with the pace. I think we've seen that with Ruth in every race she runs, and we've also seen that with Katie and Marianne at UTMB one time prior back in 2022. So I think we're going to have a hot pace off the front, probably running close to what I wouldn't be surprised is course record pace early on in the day, and trying to stick to that as long as possible. And then we have a lot of female athletes who are returning from last year, but also returning from prior top 10 finishes at UTMB as well. So I think we'll have a lot of women who are in that chase pack, a lot of women. Yeah. It's going to be very deep. And I think this is probably the deepest that UTMB's been before.
We've got stats to prove that in a second. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, but I think that's what sticks out the most. I think we're going to have a very hot front pack and then a big chunky chase pack.
I guess it should be mentioned that it kind of depends on what your goals are, right? So, and this leads to a perfect opportunity to talk to Rod Farvard about Western States and his goals going in, which was to take a big swing, right? And give himself a chance to win. And that's a very different mindset than just having a solid one, finishing in the top 10, which is also a very admirable goal for athletes this weekend. Talk a little bit about that, Rod, because it's 2 very different approaches.
Yeah. I'm looking at this men's field at least, and I'm trying to think who would be that person that wants to prove themselves the way that I wanted to prove themselves, because everyone here has proven themselves, and I think I want to say it's going to be Ben Demon who goes off the front.
He literally was just in here and he said, I don't want to be the guy like picking up carnage. I want to be in it. Yeah.
I think that's it. And, if it wasn't for him, I would actually say, and it might be too early for a hot take, but I would say this would be a slower UTMB year, because a lot of people are probably going to key off Jim. And I think Jim is in this patient phase where he knows how to race this course. He knows how to play with his food on this course, and he just wants to win. It's not really about getting a CR anymore or like doing something massive here. He wants to do the double, and the way he's going to do that is to take care of himself through the race and then eat people up. But now you bring someone in like Ben, and things are going to get a little bit different, and it's going to be a matter of if people are going to let him go or not. And a lot of people want to win this race this year. So yeah. I think it's going to be another year where they're drilling, and there's going to be a lot of carnage in the back half.
Yeah. Tom Evans had sort of intimated that he was going to be taking a conservative approach also, but I just want to repeat something that you said on my show, whatever it was, a month or two ago after Western States, that at Red Star Ridge, the second aid station at Western States, it was Jim Walmsley, Rod Farvard, Hayden Hawks, and Danny Jones in the top four. And of course, it finished in that order on the track in Auburn. Point is, if you want to finish on the podium, you better put yourself in position early, because it's getting harder and harder to run your way onto those podiums with where the sport is headed. It actually you just reminded me of something you said yesterday, that you have some sort of a hot take about how the narrative around over racing is going to change. Yeah. And I'd love to have you just maybe restate that, and we can have Leah weigh in also.
Yeah. I'm curious what you think about this. Yeah. But I think if you think about trail running in the same way that triathlon was maybe like 10 years ago, where it was like a little bit less professionalized. There was less opportunity to make a big career out of it. There was less races to go cherry pick, to go, get race bonuses at. People weren't racing that much. They were just like trying to qualify to get into Kona and then do really well at Kona, which is kind of where we're at right now, where people are just trying to qualify for Western States or qualify for UTMB. But I don't know, UTMB is like opening up like 25 new races next year, which I wouldn't say all, but like a lot of brands value that and like pay out for UTMB races. So if people wanted to, they could go around on these circuits, pick up 5K of this race, pick up 10K of this race, and
like people run 70.3s. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's what we're trying is now. Like, it's crazy how many 70.3s some guys are doing. Every other week they're traveling around the world to go race, and still we're crushing the best times ever at Kona at these world championship races. So I think our bodies can do a lot, and I think fueling has really led that revolution. And that's it. We're just following the path at Tri. And if you want to talk about that more, you should talk to my coach about that.
We should have him come in here. I would love to. That would be awesome. Leah, any thoughts on that? Because I think this is a unique insight.
Yeah, I'm somebody that enjoys racing a lot for a variety of reasons.
That's why I wanted your opinion.
Yeah, you get to practice a lot of your like truly like A-day type strategies, your nutrition. Like Rod mentioned, like recovery is just improving so much. And we used to kind of frown upon over racing, but I think there's something to be said also about like the confidence that you gain from racing. I was talking to a fellow athlete recently about just like what comes from winning a race. Like, I'm sitting here on the couch as somebody that just, I never win races. Like, I'm really good at being like in that second place, the back half of the top 10 in meaningful races. But there's something to be said about the confidence that you gain from winning a meaningful race. And I think that's what we're going to be seeing with a lot of these UTMB races popping up and gaining a little bit more notoriety is the elite athletes who are coming here to UTMB, racing those in their build-ups and having that confidence. We're going to see people who are champions of many high meaning races lining up together here. And I think that's important.
Yeah, it reminds me of something we've talked about this week. Eli and Tabor Hemming were in here. They obviously race at high volume, even though they specialize more in short course stuff. And we were just talking about the value of developing that racing muscle and developing racing skills and how that applies when you finally get to the A race. But I also was specifically, I don't know, like with this fueling revolution led by Rod the Carb Farvard over here, like maybe that is the key to allow athletes to bounce back more quickly and therefore race at higher volume. Because I come from that like overtraining, over racing generation. It actually did have a major impact on a lot of people. But as things are changing, we're learning so much, and it would be very interesting to see an analysis after the fact, after UTMB this week, of the volume of miles raced and how that maps to the eventual performance of the athletes. Like who raced the most coming into UTMB, and then how did they perform? Anyway.
Yeah, I do think it's nice too to like practice different racing techniques, like an aggressive racing technique. And I think that's, sometimes you fail on these big stages. Sometimes you fail on the smaller stages where it's like a little lower stakes. And I think it helps you fine tune your strategy for like a big world championship style race like this.
Yeah. Speaking of world championship style races, let's talk about the field. We're going to start with the women. Our guy Tony with the Sony is going to pull up a graphic here. As I've suggested, our boy Travis Longcar crunched some numbers for us here. So I'm going to set this up and ask you guys to weigh in. What we're looking at here is a measurement that takes the averages of the top ranked female athletes in this year's UTMB. And as you can see, that bar on the right-hand side is this year, 2024, notably higher than the last 2 years. One of our top storylines of the week that Corinne and Matt Daniels and I talked about on Monday was that this could potentially be one of the most competitive, if not the most competitive, women's 100-mile race of all time. It looks pretty clear that, at least according to the UTMB index, this is the most competitive UTMB on the women's side of all time. So just a couple numbers here, and then I'll ask you guys to weigh in. So last year, the top 5 women before the race had an average index score of 765. This year, it's 793. I'm not a math guy, but I think that equates to a 3% increase, which I think statistically is a very large increase. And I think it is worth saying that, that's the tip of the spear, but we're also seeing a similar thing reflected in the overall depth, right? So it's not just the tip of the spear, but it is the depth. And it bears also mentioning that obviously there's no Courtney here, and we miss her. And, it doesn't take anything away from the field is my point. Anyway, I wanted to open this up to just get your guys' comments on it, and also maybe to lead into a conversation about the UTMB index itself.
Yeah, when I hear that, it makes me think about the competition at the top end of Western states this year and how fast those times were. I think at least probably 3 of the women contributing to those top 5 UTMB indexes were likely people that ran Western states this year and threw down some insane times. Yep. So I do wonder how much those are contributing to it.
They definitely boost the index.
They boost the index, because I know I get a pretty decent UTMB index from Western states. So
deserved.
I think that's playing a large part. But I mean, when we look at this women's entrance list, I mean, it includes Ruth Croft, Katie Scheid, Blondine, Marianne Hogan, women who are just like supremely competitive in the sport and have won every single race they line up for. So I think we're seeing it get more competitive, and those women are pushing each other more and more to get the most out of themselves.
Yeah. I don't know exactly how the index works. You guys might have more insight on this, but I have noticed anecdotally that more and more people are thinking about their index. When I talk to athletes, it feels like they're paying attention to where they're ranked more often. Subjectively, does it feel the same way to you? And Rod, you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it's the easiest way to see where you are in the world. Yeah. And, we are always victims of comparison. I don't think it means anything necessarily, because if anything, it means that you are able to get into these really competitive races. And I think that's important also, that you're putting yourself out there, and like you might not be knocking out of the park, but you're giving yourself the opportunities to do so. So I do want to reiterate on what you said about the depth, because that average index is almost 800, and there's only 2 people with an index over 800. So there's a lot of people in that upper 70 range, which is that makes it really hard to predict what's going to happen here. Because I will also say too, with the indexes, like someone like Blondine raced a ton this last year, right? And her 50K index and her like smaller index score went up a lot, which boosted her overall index. We don't really know what that translates to in the course of like a 100-mile race either. So yeah, it's interesting, and it's not an exact science. And I've also heard people complain about, why is this performance ranked higher than this performance? Like people saying that about their own races. So, hey, I feel like I had a much stronger race here, but this was ranked lower than this one for whatever reason. And again, I'm not an expert on how that algorithm works, but I think it will become more and more of a conversation. And it is a fun way to be able to, as sports fans, rankings are always fun. And so it's a good way to create new fans and to, in some way quantify the performances.
And I do think UTMB has almost forced our hand to look at it a little bit more as well. So one of the ways of getting into UTMB is running one of the by UTMB races. And say you're not top 3 in that race, but you have a UTMB index score in that race that's above a certain threshold, you are then qualified to enter UTMB.
Right.
So you don't necessarily need to finish in the podium in these like majors and things like that. You just need to have and it's actually a pretty easy, relatively easy index for a lot of the elite athletes to attain.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for mentioning that. I feel like I need to educate myself more on how the index works, how the qualification in general works. That stuff is definitely not my strong suit. But speaking of the UTMB index, maybe we start our conversation about the women's field by talking about the top ranked women by index. I pulled the top 5 here. It's Katie Scheid, Blandine Lahirondelle, Fuzhou Zhang, Ruth Croft, and Esther Chilog. First of all, that's only 5 of the amazing runners who will be stepping to the start line, but also an American, French athlete, Chinese athlete, a Kiwi, and a Hungarian, which I just find super, super cool. So maybe we spend a few minutes just on the top 5 women, and then we'll go deeper. Rod, you want to get us started?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, how could you not start with talking about Katie Scheid and her coming back? It's been amazing watching her this last year, and I would actually start it from the Grand Raid last year. She won that race, and then won Canyon, set a ridiculous course record there, and then her performance at States, and she has all the tools. She's a UTMB champion before. I think she's going for legacy right now and going for the double. So, anything you want to add there, Leah?
At least 4 of those 5 women that you listed have all been top 5 at UTMB before, except for Ruth Croft. So we saw Ruth last year.
And she's making her debut.
Yeah. So we've seen, Katie's been first before. Blondine was 3rd last year. Fuzhou was 4th. Last year, and then Esther was 5th back in 2022, which I think is a really compelling narrative as well. I think there's several women in that field that have something to prove. I'm sure Katie wants to prove that she can do this double and do it well. I'm sure Ruth is out there after being a DNS last year, wanting to prove that, she's got the power and the strength and the speed to kind of put it to Katie up front and win this thing. So I think we're going to see a good match up front, especially between some of those more aggressive racers.
It's a fascinating matchup to me. And I think specifically Katie v. Ruth is just so fun and compelling as a fan of the sport to follow that. And I don't believe they've ever gone head to head. I did some internet researching, and I don't believe they've ever raced each other. Obviously, 2 of the greatest of all time. And to Rod's point, Katie has been on such a heater consistently with 100-mile racing going back to Western States last year. The year before that, she won UTMB. So Katie Scheid clearly has the 100-mile distance figured out, a past champion here. And Ruth Croft, one of the narratives we talked about earlier in the week, she's trying to be one of only 2 people to get the trifecta of world final victories. So right now, Xavier Thevnar is the only one who has OCC, CCC, and UTMB. Ruth Croft has 2 OCCs and a CCC. If she gets UTMB, she will be in that rare air as the only person who has shown world-class dominating championship performances across all 3 of those distances. It should also be mentioned in those top 5, Katie Scheid, Fu Zhao, and Esther all were on the podium at Western States also. That's probably why they're ranked high, to Leah's point earlier. One thing that I wanted to bring up, and Rod, you said that you're thinking that at least on the men's side, we might see a slower UTMB this year. On the women's side, I was just like thinking about it too. The course record for the women is 22:30, set by Courtney 2 years ago. Katie's best time is 23:15, so about 45 minutes slower. And even though she won that day, it wasn't a perfect race for Katie. So I don't know if there's anything we want to say about like, Katie has been so good over 100 miles, but she still hasn't had the perfect UTMB, even though she's won it.
Definitely. And also, Ruth is fresh. And it's kind of like these 2 different dynamics where Ruth has like totally projected this race and like wanted to really target it, where I don't know what Katie's plan was. Like maybe it was win Western first and then think about coming to UTMB, or if this has been on her mind and it's been a specific build for it. But it's very different. And I just kind of given that, like, it seems like Ruth might have the upper hand in terms of like the dynamic, and Katie is just trying to hang on to win, which she can do, definitely.
Well, it goes back to what we were just talking about. You know, it's like, exactly. I mean, but Ruth has raced, right? She's got 3 wins at between, I guess, like 50K and 80K. And so, you know, she won Taraware 100K, Transvolcania, which is about 80K, and Zugspitz, which I think was about a 50K or so. But Katie, of course, has a sick 100K in her legs at Canyons and a sick 100-mile in her legs.
Yeah, and I think something about Katie, too, she said last time she ran UTMB, she felt like the actual running portion of it was a little bit more of her weakness. And now she's spent the last 2 years focusing very intensely on actual running. So I'm very curious to see how that translates to UTMB this year, because UTMB actually does incorporate a lot of running, and people will debate that maybe this double isn't a great idea. I actually think Western States is a great tune-up race for UTMB. It's hard to call it a tune-up race, but it really is. Like, there's so much running that you do, and if you can be efficient on some of the climbs that you'd otherwise be hiking, that Katie might have been hiking last time she won, I think that's a lot of time to take off of her previous time.
That actually reminds me of something that Matt Daniels said yesterday that I'd love to at least get Rod to chime in on, because you're going to be racing CCC. What he said, which is obvious, but I never really put it together, is that the finishing time of Western States is closer to the finishing time of CCC than it is to UTMB. In other words, Western States and CCC are more similar, even though Western States and UTMB are the same, more or less the same distance. That was fascinating. So it's about 4 hours difference, about 14-hour race now for the men, because you guys are savages at Western States, about 10 hours for the men at CCC. For the men, it's, again, 14 at Western States, about 20 at UTMB. So it's 4 hours versus 6 hours difference.
So maybe you need a fast 100-miler before you come into UTMB to do
That's the ticket.
But isn't that interesting?
It is interesting. I actually think probably the thing that really makes a double hard is overtraining in between. Like, I think your block for Western States is going to get you really fit. You have 2 months. You will recover if you're doing all the things right, especially with eating now. But I think it's so easy to hop into a block again and just train so hard, especially if you come out to Chamonix and are kind of sucked into the culture here and stuff. So I think you just kind of gotta figure out your body and like don't be afraid of like the double. Be afraid of what you're doing in between and like be cautious about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, just to, I guess, add a finer point on it, the course record is 22:30. Katie's best time is 23:15. I think both her and Ruth and other women in the field, I think the 22:30 is not out of reach of somebody like Katie. She can run 45 minutes faster on this course. Quick thing, just Blandine, we barely touched her. It feels like she's sort of had a quiet season, though she was second at the European Championships. I just wanted to say that she also has a chance to get the trifecta. She has OCC and CCC victories, so she has a chance to get the trifecta herself. So a fun thing for our viewers to watch. Now let's go a little bit further in the depth, but maybe first we've got notable scratches. Ida Nielsen, Nuria Pikas, Marta Molist are not going to be stepping to the start line. Not sure why on any of those three, but important for our viewers and listeners to know. I've got this separated between sort of like the North American athletes, the European athletes, and the Asian athletes. So maybe we can just go in that order. And, we don't have to touch or go too deep on everything, but I pulled 4 names from the North American contingent that I think, are very interesting and have a legit opportunity to challenge for the win or the podium. Obviously, Marianne Hogan's been on the podium before. Helena Faulkner, I'm so excited. I feel like she's the biggest wild card in the race. Abby Hall, a big question mark in the race, but when she's on, she's on. And I'm adopting Emily Hoggood into this category also, even though she's a native born from Zimbabwe, but she's so good. So maybe we spend a little bit of time on that North American group.
Yeah, I think this is a very strong North American group this year, and you scratch the surface. There's another at least 5 women who I'd say are in contention for top 10 spots, maybe a little bit more on that back half of the top 10 spots. But I think Marianne is one that interests me a lot. When she ran here in 2022, she ran in second place. And my hot take is that she would have won that year if she didn't have her injury. That was a pretty
Remind
wild.
the people what happened that year.
It's
crazy.
Tore her psoas, in the race. Perhaps, I'm sure it was a little bit lingering prior to the race, but she and Katie had a battle out there. They were switching up the lead throughout. Katie had a pretty big low, I want to say somewhere around the Grand Col Ferret area, and Marianne took the lead, and she was hauling if you look back at the coverage then. And then Marianne's injury really flared up in those later climbs out of Triant, Valorsine, and she hung on for a really strong second place. But I do think that Marianne would have hung on for the win that year had she not had her injury. She had another bout of injuries in the last couple years that have really reframed how she's been training. So her training these days, it's still a lot of volume, but she incorporates a ton of cycling. So just being really mindful of the volume of running that she's doing to preserve her body. So I'm really curious to see how that comes together for UTMB this year. She ran a great Ultra Trail Cape Town this fall, but pretty fresh still off of her injury recovery. Yep. She was second place to Ruth Croft there. And then had a kind of rough Transvolcania for herself this
She was 6th
spring.
though. I mean,
yeah. But I think it wasn't the day that she wanted.
Yeah.
But she did.
That speaks to her talent, right? If you have a bad day and you finish 6th at Transvolcania, you're a freaking good athlete.
You are.
Yeah.
And she bounced back pretty soon after that to do 100K. I think Swiss Canyon Trail 100K
exactly.
soon after, and won that.
Yeah.
So I think she's going to.
She's the toughest human alive.
Yeah, she has to be. I can't imagine what she's going to do out there, but I think she's somebody that is also races extremely aggressively.
Yeah, I think if there's someone who goes and chases Katie and Ruth, it's going to be Marianne in there.
100%.
Yeah. Moving to Emily Hoggood, she is the best doubler in this field, right? Yeah. So in 2022, she was 5th at States, 6th at UTMB. 2023, 5th at States, second at CCC. And now she was just 4th at States. So she's closing in on that podium.
100%.
Yeah.
She's in my stone cold lock, guaranteed top 10.
Same.
Emily Hoggood. Have either of you guys spent much time with Helena Faulkner? HMF, as we call her here. That's her new nickname.
Not a
Kind of
ton.
have. Yeah.
Dude, I'm fascinated about her. Sometimes you just have a feeling about somebody who's got that it factor.
Yeah.
To me, it feels like Helena Faulkner has that, and she's been here for a few weeks. She did the lap around the mountain with the HOKA team. A young athlete, 100-mile debut. It feels to me like you have to be a certain type of person to be like, I'm making my 100-mile debut at UTMB and we're going for it, which she basically made clear. She was like, yeah, I'd like to be in the fight.
Yeah, I'm curious how she's gonna race. She's one of those people that loves the outdoors more than anyone I've ever met, and is just so like grateful to exist in the outdoors. So I think that kind of mentality you need to have out here when things get tough. I don't think she's experienced a lot of toughness in races. She's like handily won a lot of stuff. So I am curious how she responds to that. I think CCC she was chasing for a lot of for all the day actually, but that was probably her most like intense type of race moment. She hasn't had a lot of racing since then, but she has all the tools in her tool shed to do well. So
what about Abby Hall? When she was in here earlier this week, she was like, it's either going to work or it's not. I'm going in with that philosophy. Yeah. I do too. I kind of love it.
Yeah, I think with Abby, man, like what a journey for her the last year or two. Has experience being at the top of the sport and then suffering a pretty extreme injury and then crawling her way back. 100 miles, like at UTMB, she has not done before. She's done extremely well at CCC and has proved that many times. I do think she's alluded to like some IT ban issues coming into this, but I think if anybody knows how to fight and be resilient, it's Abby. Her training has been incredible. She's been spending a lot of time out here, and she's one of the athletes on the start line that's just been like extremely focused on this. And I think it's going to be an extreme just celebration for her out there. And I think she's one of those people that is going to get it done regardless of what that outcome looks like.
I kind of feel like her head game is as good as anybody. You know, like dealing with the injury in the way that she did and coming back and still like having deep belief that like the best days are ahead. That's not an easy thing to do. And she just always carries like a sense of confidence, but in like a classy way, not in like a cocky or arrogant way. And I don't know, there's something about just her vibe and her psychology that I just feel like differentiates her from a lot of athletes.
Yeah, and she's a racer too. You know, she's had a couple rough goes, I think, at like Leadville 100 in the past. But she's lined up at like Trans Gran Canaria before, which is, 70 plus miles, and has really stuck her nose in it and has fought and, toggled back and forth between leading to second to third, back up to second, and things like that. So I think being able to just handle those dynamics of racing, it's really important in UTMB. You're going to be shuffling around a bit, and having a good head on you to manage those feelings and emotions and those moves, I think, and just staying in it is extremely important.
We talked about that. So just to repeat it, she has 2 finishes at Leadville. Both were damn near golden hour. And 1 finish at Western States where she was 14th. So she's not had a Abby Hall 100-mile race yet. And the lesson she took, much like you, Rod, at her Western States 14th, was that she just ran too conservatively. She never put herself in the fight. There was no attrition, no carnage to pick off. She's been so good between 80K and 120K. Like you said, it's only a matter of time until Abby Hall gets that 160K. It's either going to work or it's not. Abby Hall, we hope it works. Let's move to the Europeans, if you guys are okay with that. Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot of other people that we could be talking about on the North American side. Like, one of the things we talked about earlier, Sabrina Stanley was ranked like 59th. Again, going to the depth conversation we just had. She was 9th here last year. So no disrespect to any of the names that we omit here. Just trying to do our best to be as comprehensive as possible. On the European side, I wrote down a bunch of names here. I can just rattle some off, and you guys can add any color you want or add any other names you want. Annalise Rousset, I wanted to add her because she gave Courtney a battle at Hard Rock last year. Courtney ultimately pulled away in the last 50K of the race or so, but Annalise Rousset actually came past me as I was stumbling through the darkness on the Hard Rock course, just flying. I was so impressed by her. Ragna de Bot's one of the greats of this generation. Claudia Tremp's amazing. Martina Valmasoy, Katarzyna Solinska. Again, just like French, Dutch, Italian, Polish. Leah, comments on some of the European talent?
It's just stellar. Starting like Martina won Madeira this year. Annalise Rousset, not far behind her at Madeira either. I think maybe 14 minutes or so. Both athletes who have proven their names on the circuit out here. Martina, I believe she's won TDS before.
Yeah.
Just incredible. I know she lined up at Speedgoat this summer and had a rough day there dealing with some health issues. So I think if health issues aside, Martina's one of the strongest mountain runners in the field.
Yeah.
Curious to see, a little bit more of that running component that comes in that maybe the Western States runners have in their legs to see how Martina hangs with them. But I think from a mountain perspective, gotta be one of those stronger athletes on the line. Claudia Tremps too. She's somebody, you see her name on the entrance list and finishers list at like Trans Gran Canaria every single year, putting down podium finishes. She DNF'd, I think just after Courmayeur last year, I believe, but was hanging out in the top 10 for much of the day. So I think we'll see a similar race out of Claudia, but hopefully hanging on well past Courmayeur and into Chamonix for the finish. But I think those two stick out to me. And like you mentioned, Annalise Rousset as well, just stellar, and she can hang.
Rod?
Did we talk about Esther Chiwag at all?
Well, I guess we didn't, but please do. Yeah. I mean, we glanced on her as being ranked in the top 5, but we didn't add any detail.
Yeah. I mean, DNF last year trying to double, but I was just at an event with her and she seems extremely hungry to get it done. I think, again, the States combo could either fry you or you could have like the perfect legs for it. So I think she's motivated to get it done this year, no matter what. And it'll just be about how much give she has. So
Leah did mention that she was 5th here a couple of years ago. And that was actually the first time I had ever really heard of her. And she's been on a heater ever since. 2 podiums at Western States.
Yeah, I guess a couple others to keep an eye out for. Maite Mayora. She's been awesome here. 3rd place and 5th place. She was 5th place last year and just ran. I think she's somebody that can get away with a conservative race, to be honest. Like, she ran pretty conservative early on and she moved well up the field around Champex-Lac, if not after that. So she made some moves. Katarzyna Solunska. I think this was truly a breakout race for her last year. I've mentioned this elsewhere, but she wasn't even an sponsored athlete coming into UTMB last year. She was an ambassador for them. And I think we were chatting after the finish and she's like, I think after this I might be an athlete for them. And her climbing late stages of the race was awesome. This year she spent some of her early season focusing on some of the shorter distance races. I think had some health hiccups come spring, but I think this has been her sole focus pretty much since she crossed that finish line last year. So I could see Maite and Katarzyna both being in our top 10.
That's what I was going to say about Katarzyna too, is almost like she has the chance to be like Esther, right?
Yes.
Like she sort of put herself on the map last year and now big blue ocean of opportunity ahead, but still without that name recognition, especially for, a lot of the people who watch and listen to our stuff. Should we move to the Asian contingent? I mean, we mentioned Fuzhou Zhang. The other person I guess we should say before we get started is oftentimes we lack as much information about the Asian contingent and we learn a lot about them when we have a chance to see them. There's great examples of this from UTMB history. Yao Miao at CCC, Sunmaya Buddha at CCC last year, Ha Hua from Thailand at CCC. At Western States, Fuzhou Zhang came and had the best performance from a Chinese athlete ever in the history of the race, finishing 2nd place. We did mention she's ranked in that top 5, but also Shen Lin, who dropped out of Western States but was in podium contention at the river. Comments on either of them or more generally the Asian contingent in the UTMB field?
Fuzhou, I think, will end up on the podium here. Yeah. She's just been on this rise. 4th place last year, improved from a prior finish here as well. And I think she's one of those runners that's getting better and better. And she can handle a lot of volume and she can handle a variety of training too. Her Strava is really fun to look at. She does a ton of just fast road running. She'll be throwing down sub 3 marathons in training all the time, but then follow that up with a 10,000 foot day the next day, which I love to see.
It's good for this course.
I think it's great for this course. And she ran a great executed race at Western States this year. Yeah. And I think she'll kind of play out the same way at UTMB. As for Lynn, I hope her feet stay intact because I believe it was like a massive foot blister that took her out of Western States.
Less rivers.
Oh my gosh, yeah, for sure. So that might be good.
Yeah, less like ice bandanas and whatever, completely soaking wet for the entire day like Western States. But that was so fun. I mean, they were basically running down Cal Street together. Of course, Fu Zhao ended up running the third fastest time in Western States history. So I bet Shenlin feels like that was the one that got away from her and she's going to be hungry. And she probably got a huge training stimulus out of the 80 miles that she did on the Western States course that will benefit her on the UTMB course. And you mentioned something, Leah, that we talked to Fu Zhao about yesterday. She races at a high volume. Last year, she did 12 races, kind of between 20 miles and 100 miles, so racing almost every single month. So for her, doing this double might come easier than people who pick their spots a little bit more. And again, like there's likely going to be a couple other Chinese or Asian athletes, period, who establish a name for themselves this weekend, who are like at the front on the UTMB tracker, and we're all like, who's that, right? So this is a great place to make a name for yourself, no matter who you are, but certainly from some of those countries that we just have less information about or who just don't have as much like trail running media and large races in their geographies. So really fun stuff. Anything else we want to add on the women before we move to the men?
I think Lucy Bartholomew is going to surprise some people this year.
Yeah, Asia Pacific, right?
I think she's the last one we haven't talked about. Yeah. She was 10th place here last year, and I was chatting with her yesterday, and she said like last year was about learning the race. This year's about like executing a great race. And she's somebody that seems to be like preserving her energy coming into UTMB this year, not spending a ton of time out in Chamonix, but rather doing all of her training in the Pyrenees, just to get good training on terrain that's much more rugged than UTMB to really like get her mind ready for the battle out there. I wouldn't be surprised if we see her improving her time by over an hour and a half this year. And I think she's another one of the Jason Coops athlete. I think he's got like 5 in just the people we listed here. So I think she's got a really good training block under her belt, and I think she'll put together a really nice race.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for adding that. Rod, anything else from you?
I just think Tara Fraga would be fun to watch too.
Yeah, I was going to mention her too. I was going to lump her in with that American contingent. But she's one of Ryan Thrower's homies from Seattle. Super, super strong. So.
Seems like a mountain woman. Yeah. So it should be fun for her. And yeah, I think her last 100 finish was 5 years ago. So this will be a...
I was wondering if she had done 100. Was it Cascade Crest? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think she had a DNF at Kodiak last year.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
As an avowed carrier of American bias, obviously a big shout out to like Hillary Allen and Amanda Basham and stuff, names who we haven't mentioned, but who are absolutely capable of performing at the highest level at races like UTMB. Let's move to the men. Before we do, a big thank you to HOKA, to all our viewers and listeners. Make sure you go to hoka.com, grab a pair of the Tecton X3, what our boy Rod Farvard's going to be rocking at CCC on Friday. Rod, how you liking your Tectons?
I love them. No, I do. I love them.
A fun little anecdote. So today I was running up the hill here. I was hiking up the hill, I should say. I was hiking up the hill. And all of a sudden I see this guy just absolutely bouncing up towards me. Gets closer, and sure enough, it's Mr. John Ray, all decked out in his HOKA gear. And every year at UTMB, I do Debo's extremely correct best athlete kit ranking. And I'm pretty sure HOKA's the early leader here. I still need to do more evaluation once we start seeing the kits on the athletes who are racing in the World Finals. But that new pack looks fire. Those new Tectons look fire. The apparel's on point. I don't know, man. Everything's looking good on you guys.
I agree. I would agree.
Is that new that new pack's performing well too?
Yeah, it's pretty great. There's an integrated pole holder, which has just been so fun to not have floppy poles on the back.
It's so funny how underrated like the pole integration is. Like once you get that dialed, it's like there's a huge psychological stress that's lifted. But again, big thank you to HOKA for supporting our coverage here in Chamonix all week. Make sure you stop by the HOKA base camp at the expo and go upstairs. Remember, I said this yesterday. I got to go experience it myself. You'll get a deeper, immersive experience as to all the research and development that went into that new Tecton X3 that we've been talking about. HOKA.com for all your favorite trail running needs. Moving to the men, Tony, I'm going to have you pull up our graph again here. Compliments of Travis Longcar. While he does, a couple notable scratches to touch on. Miguel Heras, Jean-Philippe Schumi, and Adam Mary not joining us. Maybe we can come back to that in a second because I feel like it feels to me like overall there's fewer scratches than normal, but maybe let's come back and chat about that in a second. As we look at the graph here, I just wanted to bring this up because we showed it for the women. What we don't see is what we saw for the women, a noticeable increase in talent density as determined by UTMB index average. It's basically flat year over year going back to 2022. For example, last year, the index score average was 916 for the top 5 runners. This year, it's 913. And again, that's the pointiest edge of the field, but it's similar also as we look deeper. So anyway, if you guys have any comments on that, it's hard at this point. Like, we can't expect to see step change increases in competitive depth every year. It feels like every time we go to any race, it's like, this is the fastest X race that we've ever seen, or the most competitive race that we've ever seen. It always feels true. It feels like, either way, this year's men's UTMB is on par with any race we've ever seen at the 100-mile distance.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that lack of as big of an increase is because Rod's not running UTMB.
Yeah, come on, Farvard.
Sorry. I mean, I think I would have dropped this. But
No, but I do think, perhaps with the men's field, we're seeing less of that increase because it is so dense, whereas the women's field at UTMB is historically not as dense, like comprising maybe like 15% of the field compared to like probably 85% for the men.
Yep.
And I think one of the differences just between the women's and men's race that I have felt over the last couple of years is, this might be off base, but I feel like it's easier to get top 10 as a woman at UTMB than it is at Western States these days. I think it might be the opposite for the men's field here. Like, I feel like that back half of UTMB top 10 seems quite challenging to break into for some versus Western States. But
what do you attribute that to? That's interesting.
I think as a woman in the field here, you can falter a bit and still hang on to a top 10 spot. I think as a man in this race, you can't falter because you're going to get scooped up. And we saw that with Tyler Green scooping up like 3 or 4 people on the descent just from La Flagère to Chamonix last year.
Yeah.
Like, no spot is safe.
Yeah.
So I think, for men, you really have to be on your game and you can't let up.
Travis actually pulled a screen cap from that split feature of Tyler Green's finishing split last year. I'm going to try and remember to share that in tomorrow's show because it is pretty staggering. Do we want to say anything about the lack of, there's just a couple notable scratches here. Miguel Heras, Jean-Philippe Schumi, Adam Mary. I feel like typically there's more of these race week scratches or people who would have been competitive for the win who pull out, race week or before.
Maybe that means we'll see more DNFs.
Maybe.
Oh, yeah.
It is interesting, right? Like, because last year there was much less attrition, much less carnage than we typically see. And the same is true at Western States this year. Obviously, this is the carbohydrate revolution led by our boy Rod Farvard. But there have been years where the fields just explode, right? That was not the case last year.
Yeah, I'm curious what the spread will be this year from 1st to 10th.
Yeah.
Compared to previous years.
That'll be a good thing to revisit. All right, so we got to start with the returning champ and course record holder, Mr. Jim Walmsley. Rod, you just engaged in the battle of the century against this great champion. What do you think about Jim's chances this weekend?
Hard to bet against him. That's what I'll say. No, but I don't know. I heard there were rumors he was a little hurt after Western States.
Rumor Mill Valley is what we're calling Chamonix now.
Yeah.
Rumor Mill Valley.
I think he had a slower start to training than he wanted, but to my earlier point, maybe that's advantageous also if you're trying to do a double. So I don't expect to see Jim try to time trial off the front like he did at Western. I think this is going to be a strategic race for him. Last year, actually, at UTMB, we had a pack of maybe 6 Americans running down that river trail. And notably, Jim was in it. And I don't know if he was talking to himself or talking to someone else, but he was like, all right, I just got to really chill here. Just because previous years he's drilled it and has like paid for it. So I think his general approach to UTMB is now to stay as patient as possible. He's not really trying to run off the front. He's trying to be in that front pack. And then when he feels, there might be some people breaking off of it, he might make a move, but I don't think he'll go be alone. He'll be with Tom, he'll be with Germain, and I think they're going to work together, and Jim's just going to play it safe, I think.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Leah?
Yeah, I think we saw, like, Rod helped with this, but just show that Jim is a little vulnerable too in these races. Like, he's the favorite, but at the same time, it's anybody's game. Yeah. Something that I thought was interesting, rewatching some of the Western States feed this year, was it almost felt like Jim was taking the aid stations at Western States like they were UTMB aid stations, like taking his time, taking like truly the time that he needed, and doing all, like controlling all the controllables in those spots to ensure that he had the day he did. And I want to say his time in Europe has probably facilitated that style of aid. Like maybe not the ideal way to do aid stations at Western States, but I do think it's the way to do aid stations at UTMB.
Slower pace of life here in France.
Yeah, totally.
That rubbed off on him, much to Rod Farvard's advantage. He was moving at American pace through those aid stations, wasn't he?
I kind of hope we see Jim just fly through these aid stations.
Well, that's just, so we had speaking of rumor Mill Valley, I had heard something similar, right? But there were those rumors before he won the race last year.
Yeah,
true. He posted today, "Hey, I'm handing the keys to my Instagram account over." So he is starting the race, it seems, and if it's hard to think that he would start the race not being fully confident that he would compete for the win.
Yeah, and I think everybody should go see the glow up that Jim Walmsley had on Ryan Thrower's Instagram account between the last time he did the VK here and his most recent VK here. So shout out to Ryan.
Absolute glow up. Before we move off Jim, important to just state that no male has ever done the double victory at Western States and UTMB since Killian did it in 2011. Of course, Courtney's done it in between with a hard rock in between, but a very hard double to do. And it's now been 13 years since anybody's done it, and many have tried, Jim included. What
would you, so someone does a double, is that like the greatest thing you could do in our sport?
Well, we talked about this, right? It's like, if you're Jim, how do you stay motivated, right?
Yeah.
It's like a new thing this year. He just won Western States. He's got the course record here, and he finally had the victory last year. That to me feels like something that someone of his caliber who's achieved as much as he has would be motivated about.
Yeah.
To be the next guy in that category with Killian. And I don't know, I think what you said earlier, and it's been such a fun part of Jim's career, is like, it takes him a while to figure things out.
Yeah.
But when he figures it out, it's downloaded like at the deepest core of his being, and he can copy paste it going forward, as evidenced by 2 hard Western States and then 4 straight victories. What do you have? 3 hard UTMBs, and then finally, or no, was it 4? 4 hard UTMBs, then the victory. Is that the thing where he figured it out and now copy paste and he'll run like slightly faster this year? I don't know. Just an interesting thing. But I do think that's important, right? How do you stay motivated if you're Jim Walmsley?
Yeah.
Which is a great problem to have.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So just to go through the rest of the top 5 here, again, by UTMB Index, it goes Tom Evans, Dmitry Mitchev, Hannes Nomberger, Thibaut Garivier. So again, like the women, it's American, British, Russian, German, French. So very cool and diverse in terms of the international representation there. Spend a couple minutes talking through that 4, and then we'll move. I have it sort of separated differently below this top 5, but maybe let's start there.
Take it away, Rod.
Okay. I guess I'll talk about Tom. It's similar to Ruth here, where it's kind of all chips into this basket. Is that a phrase?
Yeah.
That is the phrase now.
We know what you mean, at least.
Okay. I don't know. I'm not someone to watch like people's YouTube videos and stuff, but I know you put out a whole series on that, and it feels like, I personally, when people do that, I'm always like, I would never put myself out there like that, and just so you have to be extremely, extremely confident in order to put material out like that. And I think, Tom is podiumed here. He knows how he wants to race. He talks about how hasn't been at his peak fitness all year, so it'll be interesting to see what he does and how he races. I don't know if, I don't think he's gonna push it either. Like I think he wants to.
He
play
said as much on my show.
Too.
Yeah, he said that he at least suggested that he was going to be racing conservatively.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess recent results on Tom, second at Transvolcania and Lavaredo since May. And he podiumed here in 2022. So, and obviously first at
past Jim on the last climb too.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think something that's interesting about Tom too, and I think he alluded to this in one of his videos that he put out, was he went to Lavaredo this year. I don't think had a perfect day there by any means. I got second place. But at some point felt like he had learned all the lessons that he wanted to learn there and would have been like content DNFing, which I think is a pretty interesting perspective coming into a big summer like this. So I'm hoping that like those thoughts don't fill his brain at UTMB. Like I think he learned everything he wants to learn this summer and is hopefully putting it all together at UTMB. But I think we saw like a pretty imperfect year thus far for Tom. So I'm hoping it all does come together at UTMB.
It's great when an imperfect year is 2 second places at Transvolcania and Lavaredo. And he ran like the third fastest time ever at Lavaredo, finishing just behind Hannes Naumberger. Speaking of which, Hannes the Adonis Naumberger, such a beast and such a sweetie pie. I love the guy. He was in here earlier in the week. The thing that concerns me about him, like I have no doubt he can win the race, but I don't know if he has the killer instinct for UTMB. Like I asked him, I was like, you've been 6th, you've been 8th here. Like to me, like that doesn't feel like your ceiling. And he sort of like shrugged and like, he's proud of those and he should be. But I think you obviously need to have that killer instinct, that competitive drive, that belief that you can win in order to do it. And I don't know if he's there yet, even though I have no doubt he's got the talent.
I completely agree with that. Like in my mind, he's a guaranteed top 10, like consistent, reliable. He's won Lavaredo 3 times. And I wonder if he has that killer instinct with Lavaredo. And he showcases it there, but maybe not quite with UTMB yet. It does seem like he was struggling with some Achilles things in his build up here, but seems like they've resolved. I hope they resolve as he goes the distance, but yeah, he's solid. And I think has showcased that this year with some pretty dominant wins.
I also think that's just kind of the European culture and mentality. They're without even trying to be, they're just humble. They're like, oh, we'll see how the legs go. And then they just crush it. And it really is take it day by day for them. And if they're feeling good, they're feeling good and they'll go for it.
I'm such a big fan of his. And I know that 6th and 8th, even though those are career defining performances for most of us, are just not Hannes' ceiling. And I want him to discover that ceiling ideally this year. So shout out to Hannes the Adonis. The other two we could just touch on briefly. Dimitri Mitchev, Thibaut Garivier, I think also equally very interesting athletes. Dimitri, I think one of the most interesting stories coming in. He hasn't ever finished a 100-miler. He dropped out here at UTMB 2 years ago. To me, the man is built for this distance, built for a course like this, is insanely consistent at the highest level.
Look at a photo of his legs.
Yes, absolutely. And then Thibaut Garivier, I sort of viewed Thibaut Garivier as like the next Francois for a while. He's had a win and a podium performance at CCC and is also like competes at the highest level in a lot of different, types of race courses like Francois has, being great in the mountains, but also being great at Ultra Trail Cape Town, things like that. So comments on Dimitri or Thibaut before we move on?
You always see Dimitri at the top, like on a podium. In every big race he does, he's consistently good. I think just the 100-mile question mark. But he's done well at TDS though. So I think I heard rumblings that like nutrition has been an issue for him the longer it gets. But he's another just like Mr. Consistent like Hannes. And then for Thibaut, he was 6th here last year, I believe, and then he's 4th at Worlds last year as well. Another one of those guys that I think we'll see in the top 10, not sure where. Yeah. But yeah, just pretty dominant too.
I think he was 9th 2 years ago and then 6th. So he's improved. And like Hannes, I don't think he's discovered his ceiling here, but he did at CCC as a champion a few years ago.
Yeah, I think Thibaut is a consistent top 10er. I have a funny story about him, actually.
Hit us with it.
In 2019 at the North Face 50, I was randomly staying in a house. It was a HOKA house. Some foreshadowing. But we just had some friends in Santa Barbara that connected us there, and he was brought over. And I don't know if he ended up winning that race or getting on the podium. But anyways, like he came back to the house later, and we were all hanging out, and he was wearing speed goats. And I was like, you just hang out in your speed goats? And he's like, yeah, these are like the most comfortable shoes I've ever worn. And I'm like, what do you race in? And he's like, oh, I race in the Carbon X on the Marin trails. Yeah. And I'm like, what? This guy's insane. Anyways, all to say, he's just like a really good technical runner, I guess. And I'm sure feels very much at home on these trails.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so moving on, I have this segmented in 2 different ways. The past great performers who are back, and then sort of podium contenders who are flying under the radar, sort of our dark horses. So starting with the past great performers, mentioning 2 Frenchmen first. Mathieu Blanchard has finished 3rd, 2nd, 4th the last 3 years. And also Ludovic Pomeray, the ageless wonder who just set the course record at Hard Rock. And I just wanted to mention them together because I think that aside from the trio of Francois, Killian, and Xavier, who've all won the race 3 times or more, I believe they're the only other 2 men who have 3 top 5s at UTMB. So, of course, Ludo has won the race, and then he's also finished 4th and 5th. Like I said, Mathieu, 3rd, 2nd, 4th the last 2 years. And then below them, I have Pau Capel, Germain Granger, obviously Pau Capel, a past champion, Germain, 3rd last year. Aurélien Dunant-Palaz is back, who was 2nd in 2021 behind Francois. Tim Tollefson, a 2-time podium contender or finisher here. Rod, I know you've probably got insight on him. And finally, Scotty Hawker, who's been on the podium of both CCC and UTMB. Maybe let's start with Tim. How's he doing? How's our boy? Because, it's like there were so many years where, obviously, like he finished on the podium twice and you're on the doorstep of winning. It's been the project of his career. And now he comes in seemingly with maybe less pressure on him, but from what I understand, the fitness of his life.
Yeah, it seems like it. To be honest, I haven't, been able to talk to him much. He's been here, so we haven't been able to train together, which has been sad. But he's been putting in massive weeks, and he's never someone to put in a lot of vert. I think like if you talk to him in those years leading up to those podium performances, he was doing like 20 to 25K of vert a week, which is a lot, but like compared to what some people do. I think this block he's put in like closer to 30, and he's been running like 120 miles a week. He's been just super low key, like not posting a ton, and just I feel like he's just like super laying low. And I've talked to him a little bit this week, and he just seems like he's just saying no to things, which is great. And yeah, I think he's just as hungry as ever. It's just like not anything he needs anymore.
Yeah. It seems like he's just like over the last year, it just has felt like he's in a different headspace where he's just content with his life and his career. But it's usually with that mindset that we have our best races. Anything on Tim you want to add there, Leah?
No, I agree with you, Dylan. It's like he's transformed a bit from this like podium chase here that seemed to be just like taking like all consuming for a couple years there. And it seems like he's doing a lot more like community running, training partners, where in the past it was a lot of that solo running too. So I'm hoping like the friendship, the training you guys have done together too, Rod, and like nutrition knowledge, because I think his 3rd place finishes here too was we're probably fueled entirely different than how people are fueling races now. So I'm curious to see bringing Tim into 2024 with the nutrition strategies, what that looks like at UTMB for him.
Yeah, so good. Let's talk about Germain. So 3rd here last year, one of the fastest times in UTMB history. Quiet season. I think he was supposed to run Lavaredo, but didn't. Mm-hmm. Do we know how Germain's doing? Because it's like Abbey Hall, right? Like when you have like a huge break from racing, you could see it as you come in with a deep level of freshness, but also, as we've talked about, it's good to knock the cobwebs off.
Yeah, I think he Supermaned on a trail or something like that and broke his rib. Had to miss Lavaredo. I think he's been running since early July, and he has a massive base from skiing. I think he was probably putting in great training. And I'm just going to say my pick right now. I have Germain winning the race.
Same.
Yeah. So, yeah. I think he's going to do what he did last year, but I think he's going to hang on. Like, I think Jim had a lot of fight in him last year. If I were to guess, he has less fight than he did last year, and I think Germain's going to capitalize on that.
That's why the motivation is so key, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and Germain's been 9th, 5th, 3rd, and question mark this year here. So he's been increasing and like increased by 2 places last time. So if he increases by another 2 this time, that's a first place finish. But yeah, I think the rib injury is definitely a question mark, but I think it seems that he trains just every year for this. Yep. So everything in the build is for this. So yeah, I think he's going to be strong. And I think coming back from an injury like that, I was reading some of his Instagram posts too, just like asking his doctors, like, can I start running like a month earlier than you say I can? And I just think with that mindset, he's going to like throw it all at the wall and see like what sticks.
All right. Awesome. Bold predictions here. So fun. Pau Capel seems like he's still searching for the form he had a couple of years ago, but obviously always a fearless racer. Wouldn't be surprised to see him, at least with the lead group, through Lake Contamine. We got to just double click on Ludo, right? He was in here the other day and I was like, can you win this race again, man? Like, because he's like, no, I don't think so. And I was like, dude, you ran 21:33 at Hard Rock. You could definitely run 19 and change at UTMB if you run 21:33 at Hard Rock. He did 2 soft rocks before Hard Rock. He's done 2 tours of Mont Blanc also in between.
Wow.
Yeah. He said he basically is doing only like very slow, very low intensity stuff. And he didn't seem confident, but as I reminded him, there's recent precedent with Francois and Killian pulling off the Hard Rock and UTMB double. Yeah.
And he went from like 50th to 5th last year. And I think maybe not doing a lot of the faster type training will allow him to chill a little bit more and just kind of not having the confidence in the fast legs. And he could totally pull that off again. If he wins it, that would be amazing to see. But he's just the best guy.
He is.
Yeah. He's so funny.
He's so hilarious.
He's so funny and so low key and just plays everything down. But it's just such a savage.
He's also a champion eater. I saw him disperse his knack purees at aid stations that he had consumed at Hard Rock, and he was just like tens of them at times. And I'm like, did you just eat all of that in those last like 2 hours? So I think that pairs well with UTMB, and it's probably what he's done in the past year to have his results. But champion eater, which I think fares well on a course like this.
He's also the type of athlete where it always looks like he's working hard. Drew Holman has a funny anecdote about it at Western States where he passed him in like Volcano Canyon. He was like, oh, that guy's dead. Absolutely dead. And then he just like hung with him all the way down Cal Street. Drew's like, why won't this guy break? Like,
dude, I had the same thing in 2023. I caught up to him at Roby Point and he was like death marching up. And I like start to pass him and he starts battling. And like, we're running side by side almost to the top. He drops his daughter who's pacing him. And then he turns to me and goes, wait, are we in 10th? And I was like, no, we're in 11th and 12th. He's like, oh, never mind. He just stops. He turns around and goes down the trail back to his daughter.
That's amazing.
Unbelievable. What a great story.
Total legend.
What a great story. Well, thank you for sharing that on the program here. All right. So before we move off these past great performers, just want to give shout out to Aurelien Denon-Palaz. You know, I feel like he's coming in under the radar. Last year, I think he was number 4 trail runner of the year with a Hard Rock and Diagonal des Fous victory. He's been second here. I mean, just that alone, right? Being second at UTMB, being a winner at Hard Rock and a winner at Diagonal des Fous, you're one of the best mountain 100 milers in the world if that's on your resume, but he still flies under the radar. I guess that's all I wanted to add there for the past group. You guys want to move to sort of the dark horses?
Yeah.
All right. So let's start with Ben Demon because he was just in here. I may be his biggest fan in the world. The dude from Cincinnati, he's got a fascinating and similarly hilarious story where he just like was this dirtbag through hiker who was just like addicted to adventure, discovered ultra running. And now he brings like this crazy scientific approach to his training. He just strikes me as a super unique person and who has the talent and now the experience and the proven performances at high level races that he could win here.
Yeah, he's had a great year leading up to it. First in Madeira, second at Andorra. And so hungry, so hungry. He wants it so bad. Yeah.
Last year.
I don't know about the guy too much, so I want him to see him. I want to see him have that day, and yeah, I think like I mentioned before, he's gonna take it out.
Yeah, and I think something he alluded to between last year and this year is like he's increased his volume by like 20%. Because he felt like that was a weakness of his last year, was just his overall volume. But he's also had like a lot of just faster training too. Like he's a guy on paper that I would not say is the speediest guy in the field, but he was one of the very few that I saw throwing down some track workouts on his Strava. So I think he knows where his weaknesses are, and he's really leaning into that this year. So I'm curious to see how that plays out, especially paired with like this more aggressive racing strategy, which I think we're likely to see from him.
He was just talking about his track prowess. He said he's faster than he's ever been right now. He was like, I could throw down a 2-mile time trial right now and be faster than I've ever been in my life. But it goes to our point. Like, you got to be a mountain athlete with leg speed at UTMB. And it seems like he's sort of got that formula, at least, you know.
Is there any race now that you don't need to have everything?
That's true, right? Yeah that's true.
No.
Another American we got to shout out is our boy Drew Holman.
Absolutely.
He's the consummate under the radar guy. He's had a bullseye on this race.
I'm so excited for it. Like, I think he's had that sole focus probably since last year. Like, he got a golden ticket this year, turned it down so he could focus specifically on UTMB. I was talking to his partner Sasha today, and we were just saying, like, it's funny that Drew gets like termed this like speedy fast guy. I feel like he is, yes, but he's like, I was an ultimate Frisbee player. Like, yeah, he's resilient, he's tough, he's strong, and like he's great in the mountains, and he is consistent. Like top 5 at CCC, top 5 at Worlds, top 5 at Western States. Like he does it all. He's had an amazing performance at Ultra Trail Cape Town as well, which is technical as all heck. Yeah. Like he does it all, and I think he's somebody that's going to be. I think he'll run this race a bit more patient than some, and I think I could see him pulling up some carnage in the second half of that race, and would not be surprised if we see him in the top 5.
Yeah. Rod, anything on Drew?
Yeah, just someone you don't want behind you.
I was going to say that. Yeah, like he's the guy, like Zach Miller in some ways. It, like you'll never out tough him.
You're right.
You know, like you have to out compete him or outsmart him in some way. But he's the type of athlete who like will put himself in the hospital to compete. You know,
Yeah.
I would love to see him race in the front pack. And
that would be different, right?
It would be different. Yeah, I know he loves that come from behind, and it's worked really well for him. But yeah, it all depends what his goal is. I haven't had a chance to chat with him. I don't know if he wants his first UTMB to just be under his belt or he wants to go for the podium. But and it just shows it's 2 very different racing strategies. And yeah, I think I just want Drew to go for it personally.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know. I kind of want Drew to just have
fun.
have a really solid day out there.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I also wrote down like Shenji Shen. Obviously, he could, you know, win or finish on the podium. A guy who I'm intrigued by, who I don't know that much about, is Miguel Arsenio, the Portuguese athlete who's been very good at big races in the past, who's sort of flying under the radar. Any other sort of dark horse names that we can talk about? We don't have to, say every name in the field, but
I think Thibaut Baronian, this will be his first UTMB. He's really solid often.
Yeah.
And I know he does a lot of his training with Marianne Hogan. I don't know if we're privy to his entire Strava by any means, but also seems to do a decent amount of cycling as well. But yeah, he's a hard one to bet against in these races, but curious to see. Yeah, same thing like Drew, just first UTMB is a little bit of a question mark.
Yeah.
What about Benoit Marmusel?
Oh yeah, he's solid.
Yeah. First at the Grand Raid in 2022, second at Hard Rock in 2023, third at Doyen-Thanon this last year. So the guy's a mountain runner. He DNF'd UTMB last year, but
after Hard Rock.
Yeah, exactly. So
no, that's a good name to add. Well, again, no disrespect to the people we didn't mention. Obviously, this is as deep, as competitive as it gets on the global stage, and we are so excited to watch it unfold. I did just want to give 2 final shout-outs before we go. One to Vincent Bouillard. Do you know him, Ron?
yeah, I just met him. Yeah.
So we talked about him. We briefly talked about him on a previous show, but this is the sleeper fantasy guy, footwear developer for HOKA, sick, talented
Dude.
athlete.
Yeah.
Actually, Ludo, I talked to Ludo about him, and Ludo was like, yeah, we went for a run. He was too fast for me. So shout out to Vincent Bouillard. And one final thing, Mike McMonagle in the field here. Is he a dark horse?
The goal's top 20, so we'll see. We'll see.
That's achievable.
Yeah, we have a good feeling that he'll be spending a lot of time with the women's field, which is really exciting for me when I'm crewing, that I can truly be there for the whole women's race. So yeah, good luck out there, Mike. I'll be crew captain, and hopefully
Mike.
Hopefully I don't fail you.
What's the spreadsheet look like? Are you guys like?
He told me today. He's like, oh, I copied your spreadsheet from last year. I took your times and Tyler Green's times, and he's like, I'm kind of going for a happy medium between the two.
Well, shout out to Mike. It'll be awesome to follow his race throughout the weekend. And I know he's been focused on it.
He's been focused. This is his best training block ever. He had a DNF earlier in the summer with just like a ton of nutrition learnings. It is going to be pretty humid and a little warm out there. So I think that's going to play into these dynamics as well, especially like a lot of our Mountain West North American athletes. Like that's foreign. Like I have been so sweaty out here.
Yeah, I actually was meant to mention that, like the weather component of things. I bet it'll be pretty pleasant overnight, but could be warm. Maybe the final question to close us down is, are the course records in danger this weekend?
I think the women's course record is. I don't think the men's is.
Agreed. Yeah. I think women's definitely.
Cool. Awesome. Closing comments from the panel. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
I'm just really excited to kind of watch from the sidelines this year. It's going to be an awesome race. Excited to follow your race too, Rod.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm also excited to just watch this year. I remember finishing last year and being like, I need a break. So, yeah.
Well, hopefully you get a few hours of sleep before you go watch.
Yeah.
Hopefully it goes really well.
Maybe
you
not.
Finish.
Just keep it going.
You can come
Finish
help
around
me
dinner time on Friday night.
Yeah.
Catch a snooze, maybe have a beer, and then you could plow through the tunnel to Courmayeur and just jump back into it. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us. To our viewers and listeners, make sure you subscribe to the channel before we go. Here, a big thank you for your support in that regard. Go play fantasy, fantasy.freetrail.com. Pick 10 deep in OCC, CCC, and UTMB for a chance to win some great prizes. We're going to be back again. Tomorrow is OCC, which is going to be sick.
Yeah.
We should say it's going to be super fun. We're going to be out on the race courses all day, so make sure you follow Freetrail on Instagram. We'll hopefully be cranking some content out there, and then we'll be back for our show to talk through the OCC results and make our final predictions for UTMB. A big thanks to the team behind the scenes, Tony with the Sony, Ryan with the Fuji, Harmony back home, who's been instrumental in keeping our wheels moving forward all week. Best week of the year. Rod Farvard, Leah Yingling, I'm Debo. We'll see you tomorrow.